Dan, a lot of people have these big plans, right? They have like these 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and they've got it mapped out in their mind exactly where they're going, exactly how they're going to get there. That has not been my journey in life. Mine has been a little bit more intuitive. And I understand from our previous discussion that might have been more of how you also have navigated your career. Is that, am I picking up on something that seems familiar to you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely spot on based on our previous conversation. I mean, I haven't been one of those Steve Jobs, I want to change the world, type of people, right? I've had some general directions of things, that I've wanted to go in, but I didn't have this big master plan. It was sort of like, as opportunities presented themselves to me, right, I made decisions about, do I want to take this one or not? And then that led me down one path, right? And then it was sort of, then there's another opportunity to make a decision, which either continued down that path or took a slight turn, and that's sort of how I got, to where I am today. It wasn't this big master plan of, I'm going to be at this point in 5 years. So, yeah.
No, and I think that's so wonderfully refreshing, because I think there are a lot of us out there, right, that just kind of go on this intuitive journey. And so for you, what is it that usually sparks that next opportunity? Is it a passion? Is it an interest? Do you just feel like, oh, that could be cool? Like what's kind of some of the internal drive there when something comes up? Because stuff comes up, I'm sure you've said no to as well, right? It's just been like, yeah, no, we're good. Sure. So what kind of compels you to make a shift?
It always depends. It's whatever the opportunity is, where I'm currently at in my place in life, and where I sort of the direction I want to go. Right. I mean, those change, right? When you're younger, right, you're sort of thinking about, how do I build my career and make more money, and then when you're getting closer to retirement, it's more like, well, what do I want to do that still keeps me engaged in something that I really enjoy, but I don't want to work 60, 70 hours a week anymore, right? So, right. Those, again, right, those things change over time. I think for me, if I think about decision making, it's really two parts, right? There's the making the decision itself, and then there's the execution and the follow through on the decision.
Yeah.
And when I think about making the decision itself, it's funny. So I'm in data and analytics. I've been in data and analytics for more than 25 years. I do love data and analytics, but decision making for me is sort of part science, right? The data and analytics part, like I gather and analyze the facts, right? Identify and evaluate, what are the different alternatives, sort of look for, be aware of my own, as much as possible, my own cognitive biases, right? We all have them. People can go search human cognitive biases and see all the different ones that are out there, right? But then there's also, an art or an intuitive part for me. Like, how does it make me feel? Like, when I think about this opportunity, do I feel like at ease, or do I feel dis-ease, right? And like, where do I feel that? Do I feel it in my gut? Do I feel it, some other part of my body? What does it feel like, right? If I felt that feeling before, and when I felt that feeling before and I made that decision, was it a good decision or was it a bad decision, right? And I think sometimes it's good to get the facts. It's good to sort of do that analysis part. But I think in our society right now, we've tended to move away from sort of that intuition part. And I think that's an important part of it also.
I love you going that. So you're saying like, okay, decision comes up and you're checking to see if there's peace around it, right? Like, do I have a sense of this calm?
Right.
Peace? Maybe excitement as well. Does that play a role in this as well? Like, hey, is this something?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So it's not, data, is important, but it's not all, we're humans, we're emotional, right? And then I think the final piece for me is like, after you go through that, like, what's the most important outcome, right, that I want out of the decision, right? So I'll give you an example. So many years ago, I had the opportunity to go to VMware pre-IPO. And for anybody who's in the tech world, right, VMware, right, if you'd gone pre-IPO, you probably would have been a good move, right? And, the facts of it were, it was good career progression opportunity for me. But, there was a farther commute. In terms of how I felt, I was scared, but it wasn't like scared it was the wrong thing. It was scared of like, oh my God, this, can I do this, right? But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Having a little a fear around that. But I have a son who has high functioning autism, and he was much younger at the time. And so for me, when it came to my career decisions, right, the most important thing for me was stability for the family, safety in terms of, medical benefits, making sure that I was there to help support my wife, right, and the family, right. So that was the most important thing for me when I was making career decisions at that particular point in my life. So I turned it down, and, people would say, oh man, if you had done that, but it was the right decision at the right time, right? And you make those decisions, and you can't, you make them and you move forward. You can't, if you look at the past and go, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. We all do that, right? But
yeah.
But
you don't live there. I love what you're saying. You look at the past, but yeah, but it felt, but you knew why you made the decision. That's so interesting to me.
Right.
Like, you have peace about why you made that decision. So,
right.
Which allows you, frees you up just to keep moving. I'm sure you're not caught. You're not like trapped in your past.
Right.
So you make these decisions, and okay, so you take the job, you make the decision. Then it's not all Hollywood, right? I mean, there's some good days and bad days in any job, right? And so what about
right.
like sticking with the decision? Like what are some of the things you picked up in your career around that?
Yeah. So, I think one of the biggest things is once you make the decision, you have to own it. Like, I made this decision, right? So people talk about like, I didn't have a choice, right? You always have a choice. It's just there's no ideal situation, right? And the choice that you make is typically the least bad choice, right? But it's still a choice. And I think that it's really important to own it, because if you don't, you sort of like end up playing the victim. Oh, poor me, right? So like, if I go back to the VMware example, right, I could say, oh, my family made me not take the job, and right, and that wasn't true, right? I was very clear that I made the choice not to do that, and I think that the power of owning the decision is that once you make it, you can't sort of straddle the fence, right? You can't second guess yourself. Like, you just got to commit, right? And lean into it, right? And if you haven't owned the decision, you'll never fully lean into it.
I love where you're going there, because also that kind of led you to holding like resentment towards your family, right? Like, oh, what I did it for the family, but I missed out on this great opportunity. It's like, I love that radical extreme ownership that you're talking about. Like, you knew why you made the decision and why. And so, I know you spent over a decade with a very large company, and that, there's a lot of moves right now. There seems to be different strategies out there. And I'm not saying one's good or bad. I'm not making a value judgment on it. Some people, they tend to move every 12 to 18 months. There aren't that many people left who tend to stick with, say, an opportunity for a decade or more. And so what were some of the benefits to you? Because I'm sure there were some challenging times in that as well, right? It's 10 years. What were some of the benefits now looking back on having spent a considerable amount of time in one place? Like, this leaned in and completely owned that opportunity.
Yeah, I think for me, what I found is, like, it takes 9-18 months at a place before you really like fully, sort of get yourself settled into it, right? I know there's some stats, I don't know, it takes like 10,000 hours of practice when you start some new activity to be competent at it, right? And it's sort of the same thing, right? It takes a certain amount of time. I mean, even if you've been in software development or product marketing or, whatever it is that you do, even if you've been in it for a long time, when you go to a new company, it takes a while to figure out your place, figure out the culture, figure out who you work with, and develop relationships with people, right? For me, we spend, well, especially in the tech industry, right? We spend so much time at work that if you don't develop relationships with the people that you're working with, if you don't trust them, if you as a team, if you don't have that trust, right, then you can't be nearly as effective, right, as you could otherwise. And that takes time, right? And so that's really a really important thing for me, is the relationships that I build with people.
And that takes
time to do that, right? And yeah. And then once you do build those relationships, right, then like, leaving your friends.
Yeah, it's true. It's like a work family.
Yeah.
And
I think.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
No, so, and then you start achieving some amazing things together. You kind of get into this flow state, right, where you know how to work really well together, and you work on some really interesting work, and you see the fruit of your work come to fruition. And so that's also, I'm sure, one of the major benefits of really kind of taking a more long-term view on an opportunity.
Right. And the other piece of it, I think, is that the people above you get the opportunity to see you over a longer period of time, have more trust in you, will give you more opportunity to grow your career, expand your sphere of influence, those types of things.
Absolutely. And you build trust, right? Trust goes both ways. I mean, I know you've had a lot of folks that you work with over the years, and probably a number of people that have been, that you've been their leader. How do you coach and develop like that level of intuition and that total ownership in folks that you work with? Is it lead by example? Are there some certain conversations you have? Just like, how do you instill that type of a culture in your part of the organization?
Yeah. So I think once you have that baseline of trust, and the people that are working for you, like, know, they feel like, man, he's got my back, right? Whatever happens, he's got my back. Then you can, and you have that level of trust with them that, like, when I give them a task, they're going to go do it. If they've got some issue, they're going to come to me, right? Then you can start to really, okay. I guess there's coaching, right, and mentoring. I sort of separate them out, right?
Okay.
So I view coaching more along the lines of, helping them deal with situations that come up. I had an argument with this person in that group, like, okay, let's talk through it. Let's look at what happened. Let's look at your part in it, right? Because we always co-create situations together, right?
Yeah.
And we have some role in that, right? And then looking for ways to, like, I think a lot of times it comes down to how you say stuff, right? So, like, sometimes you'll say, you should have done this, right? Or you should do this, right? And so that will tend to put people on the defensive, as opposed to saying, have you considered, right? What if you did this, right? And it's sort of that, persuasion is the art of making other people think it's their idea type of thing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is like there's a heavy emphasis on the soft skills, right? The soft side of leadership, and it sounds like you're also advocating a very proactive approach. If there's a conflict, let me try to make amends. Let me reach out. What was my part in it? That takes humility.
Mm-hmm.
I bet the ego hates that at some point, right? At some point, the ego wants to hold on to its story, right, and condemn the other person or whatever. And so how do you work around that? Like, is it just a discipline that, hey, this is how I approach these types of situations?
It's a constant practice, right? You have to be, you have to want to do it. So you have to want to have deeper relationships with people, right? To create deeper relationships with people, you have to have the courage to be honest, right? And sometimes that honesty creates fear because we become vulnerable. Like, hey, you know what? I made a mistake, right? And so now I'm vulnerable, right? So you have to have that courage to be vulnerable. And then on the flip side of it, when somebody's saying something to you, you have to have the courage to listen to what they say, right? Not just hear the words, but really like, okay, what are they trying to say, right? And notice, and this comes back to the feeling part, like when somebody says something to you, right, and you'll know, if you're paying attention, you'll notice, like, what am I feeling in my body? Like, oh, am I tense, right? Like, okay, I'm tense. What's that about, right? Did they touch on something? And you don't necessarily have to agree with them, but, trying to listen, right? I mean, I think it's a larger problem in our society right now. We can't have healthy debate or conversations about things. And that's so critical to leadership or just your relationships in general, right? So
I love you going. I never thought about it. I thought it struck me as you were talking, which was this idea of like holistic listening, not just with your ears, but with your body, with your energy, like listening, like what's hitting you. Why is it hitting? There's a great saying I heard once, if you spot it, you got it. So if you see it in somebody else, chances are you probably have it yourself. It's something you're reacting for a reason, in other words.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And asking for clarification. I mean, I think it's the way the mind works, right? Is we do tell stories, right? We get little pieces of facts,
right,
and we put them together into a story, right? That's what the mind does, right? Yeah. But sometimes that story isn't true, right? We've interpreted the facts in a way based on, right, our own neuropsychology, right? I mean, we sort of, I use the term, we're domesticated. Some people take offense to that, right? But like the Buddhists say, causes and conditions, right? But the way that we're brought up, the things that happen to us in our lives, right? They create neural pathways, right? And so somebody might say something that, kicks off this neural pathway, right? And causes this huge reaction. But if you start to notice, like, oh, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling that? And then you notice that, oh, he said this, and then I felt this. I remember like 6 months ago, somebody else said something similar, right? And you start to see your own internal stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a high degree of consciousness. I mean, that is some awesome mindfulness right there, right? And so, do you sometimes, and I mean that with respect, I love that. I mean, does that sometimes show up in the moment, or sometimes is part of that mindfulness also looking back on a situation and be like, okay, I can connect the dots better now. Yeah. I'm not, maybe I was a little emotionally charged or something.
It's absolutely both. I mean, look, it's a practice. We're all human. We all have good days. We all have bad days. We all have times when we like flip out. But if you watch, right, like, then you start to see, oh yeah, okay, this is what's going on for me. And then you may not be able to control it at first, but you can say, ooh, okay, we're having a conversation. Oh, I'm having a reaction. Oh yeah, I recognize that. I can't really control it, but at least now maybe I know enough to like not react back, right, in the sort of argumentative type of state.
It's like a reactionary, like this kind of instead of responding. Yeah, right. I get it.
Right.
You said something earlier that I thought was really interesting. You said, like part of trust is people know that you've got their back. How do you shield people if pressure's coming from the top? If there's like that part art, part science, maybe like how, like as a leader, how do you shield your team from some of that pressure? Or how much do you let them have? Because they do need to know about it. What's some of your experience in that realm as part of creating a safe environment for your team?
Yeah, like most things in leadership, right? Finding the balance, right, is the hard part. And I don't know that I really have these are things that I would naturally shield them from. These are things that I wouldn't, but it is that finding that balance of, look, we all sort of know, like, okay, they don't, my direct reports don't need to know certain things. I can't really give a good example right now. I'm not,
no, okay. So it's more.
But yes, I think that. But I think that is a very important part.
Yeah.
Right. That to help them stay focused, to help them not get overwhelmed. I mean, that's a big part of things right now. Is just people feel overwhelmed, right? So how do I help them not feel overwhelmed in their jobs?
I love that. And kind of final piece here today, because I love what we've taken this conversation. A lot of people are leaving work jobs, and I know you left one not too long ago yourself. How do you leave a job well? Like, what are some things you do to end something well so that it's a smooth transition and you get to have a nice bookend, if it's possible, on that opportunity?
Yeah, for me, the way I leave things well, I mean, it comes back to relationships, right? If you've built relationships over time and then you're honest with people to say, hey, look, this other opportunity came up. Here are the reasons, why I'm looking at this opportunity. Helping them understand your reasoning, and then, giving them time to sort of, as much as you can, that, adjust to your leaving, right? I mean, it's like, I know 2 weeks is the standard sort of thing, right? But if you've got, like for myself, right, being like closer to retirement, and maybe I want to work 3 days a week or something, right? And having those conversations with your, employer, right, of, like, hey, longer term, this is sort of, where I'm going. I don't know. Just treat people how you'd want to be treated if you were in this situation.
Honest communication and giving as much explanation as you can, and just I get that. Yeah. I love what we've covered today, because I think there's some really powerful themes in there. One is the power of sticking with an opportunity for a while, I think is very, very powerful. I think the intuitive way that you've selected great opportunities in your career and some that you walked away from for the right reasons, and knowing what those reasons are. And then 3, I think, relationships. It is the crux of how it influences everything. I suppose there's some roles out there that require very little relationship interaction, but generally speaking, that is where some great things can happen if it's handled the right way.
Right. And I think that is the thing that companies are looking for more and more from leaders, right? I mean, you can have the technical skills, you can have the business knowledge, but can you create the relationships to get people to work together and collaborate?